At the turn of the millennium, fears began to grow in the UK about the rollout of mobile phone networks. They were exacerbated even further during the mid-2000s by the birth of TETRA Airwave, the police's new radio system. Stories began to spread like wildfire about the negative health effects of being close to cell towers or airwave sites. These stories referred mainly to the thermal effect and the pulse effect. Now, I've covered the adverse health effects of cell towers, or lack of evidence of them, in numerous other videos, so I won't bleat on about them too much here. There's links in the description below. I'll give you some top line in a second though. During the late 1990s and early to mid-2000s, lots of really interesting websites appeared that were nothing but fear-mongering and gossip-spreading tools. Today they've all but disappeared, but using the Internet Archive, we can go back a quarter of a century and take a look at them, so stay tuned for an internet deep dive. They all clung to the same news stories, all propagated the unfounded ramblings of people like Barry Trower, and never put forward anything but sensationalism, opinions, pseudoscience, and non-peer-reviewed research efforts. Some had political agendas, some were there to make money out of the bewildered, and with some of the stories they spread, it's no wonder so many people were terrified of the rollout of mobile phone networks and Tetra Airwave. The IEGMP published a report entitled Mobile Phones and Health, or the Stewart Report, in May 2000. It looked at the interaction of radio frequency fields with tissue and examined epidemiological studies, research on cells in culture, experiments on animals as well as volunteers, and concerns about the use of mobile phones while driving. It also described the operation of mobile phones and reviewed recommendations on exposure standards for RF radiation. It basically showed that exposure to RF radiation below guidelines does not cause adverse health effects to the general population. There is some scientific evidence which suggests that there may be biological effects occurring at exposures below these guidelines. Biological effects do not necessarily result in health effects, and gaps in knowledge justify a precautionary approach to the use of mobile phone technologies until more detailed and scientifically robust information on any health effects becomes available. The review of the scientific information relevant to concerns about exposures to RF radiation was comprehensive and didn't demonstrate any clear health effects caused by the use of mobile phones or being in proximity to base stations. However, from the evidence heard by the IEGMP, it was clear that there was considerable public concern about the possible health implications of the use of this rapidly developing technology. The Stewart Report contained 33 recommendations, most of which were designed to provide more information about phones and base stations. No credible evidence has ever been presented that shows mobile phone towers are harmful to human health in their current configuration. I use this term a lot. The best analogy of this is a plug socket is completely safe until you put a fork in it. Which brings me back to the thermal effects and pulse effects that all of these websites and every conspiracy nut since goes on about. At ground level in your house, in your car, or on the street, you're completely safe. The RF radiation from a cell tower has no effect on you whatsoever. Up at the top of the mast, of course, things are different, and you don't want to be close to transmitting antennas for too long. Not because it'll change your DNA, that's ionizing radiation, radiation that has enough energy to break an electron away from an atom, a process called ionization. Because ionizing radiation has enough energy to remove electrons from atoms, it has the ability to change the chemical composition of the material it interacts with. Everything you'll find on cell towers and airwave towers emits non-ionizing radiation. It doesn't have enough energy to remove an electron from an atom or molecule. So why is it dangerous up close? Well, the eye is considered to be a critical organ when determining safety standards for radio frequency radiation. Experimental data obtained using animals showed that RF heating of the eye, particularly over a specific threshold, can induce cataracts. While non-ionizing radiation isn't strong enough to directly affect the structure of atoms or damage DNA, it does cause atoms to vibrate, which can cause them to heat up. This is what is often classed as the thermal effect. This brings me on to inverse square law. It states that a signal decreases by the square of the distance. For example, if you stand 1 foot away from a transmitter and get a power measurement of 100 for argument's sake, at 2 feet away it'll be 25 and so on. So at ground level where the public are allowed to be, the thermal effects of towers like this are non-existent, However, the conspiracy nuts took this evidence of thermal effects and ran with it, spreading nonsense stories. As for the pulse, well, this refers to Tetra Airwave. The average output power of a Tetra radio can, in some circumstances, exceed that from a mobile phone, and as compared with mobile phones, for which the transmission is pulsed at 217 Hz, a Tetra signal has a pulse rate of 17.6 Hz. Therefore, the mechanism of any potential effects on health, including cancers, may differ if any, and we've yet to see any of those effects over 20 years down the line. The Stewart report suggested that, as a precautionary measure, signal modulation around 16 Hz should be avoided if possible in future signal coding development, based on experimental findings of increased brain calcium efflux associated with such frequencies in animal models. This refers to experiments conducted in the early 1970s that looked at the effects of modulated VHF fields on the central nervous system of animals. Again, there's never been any link between Tetra Airwave and adverse health effects, despite numerous detailed, thorough and peer-reviewed research programs, videos on which you'll find in the description. Many people jumped on the anti-cell tower bandwagon and spread the health effect narrative purely because they didn't want towers near their homes. They were angered by the proximity of towers to their houses, and in some cases this anger was justified. They were scared that they'd lower the value of their property, or even worse, render it worthless. They were frustrated that sometimes no pre-planning consultation was undertaken with the parish council, local residents or schools. They were concerned that they destroy the views of the local area or have an adverse impact on wildlife. So what better way to support your argument than to jump on the health effect bandwagon? Let's take a look at the websites, in no particular order. First we'll visit the Stop the Groombridge mast, a website first archived in February 2002. This epitomises the early 2000s era internet for me, and I love the homepage animation. Entering the site you came to a homepage that had a similar aesthetic to the orange mobile branding of the era. This site was set up to mainly oppose the construction of a cell tower disguised as a tree in Groombridge, on the Kent and East Sussex border near Royal Tunbridge Wells. It had a news page which spoke of the council objecting an orange cell site, a health issues page with the usual spiel on, a list of objection reasons, the planning officer's address for sending objections to, and the location of a petition that could be signed. It would appear that the site did its job, and that the council didn't back the idea. I can't be sure if they appealed and what the final outcome was, but the website was last archived in December 2003 before it disappeared. Now we'll look at No to Tetra, that opens with the tagline, "Have you been tetrified?" This website was first archived in August 2004 and mainly opposed to the rollout of Tetra Airwave. Its objective was to spread awareness of Tetra and how it affected you, the public. It had information on Tetra and describes how, quote, electromagnetic fallout harmed your health within a 500-metre range and how it interferes with the brains of people with epilepsy at a range of 5 to 10 miles. Of course, complete nonsense. There was a gallery which unfortunately wasn't archived. It had links to the Stewart report, but like all of these sorts of sites, they only picked the bits which they could tweak to support their argument, and of course, plenty of links to Barry Trower's talks. I'll say no more. There was also a page full of industry contacts you could complain to, including Peter Sitch. Does anybody remember him? He always seemed to get it in the neck.
Can I just, in that case, show you this report?
Mm-hmm.
How can you explain to me that that isn't a pulse?
Well, you've just handed me a report completely out of the blue, dated June 2002, and thank you for that. I'll take that away and I'll take it to our engineers and I'll ask them to respond to you at a future date. Thank you very much for that.
Needless to say, this site didn't last long, and it was archived for the last time in September 2005. Similarly, there was a site called No to Tetra Scotland, which was very similar to No to Tetra. It had the description of Tetra and the list of unfounded health concerns which to this day have never been seen or proven. Again, sites like this always refer to the stories of ill police officers and the death of PC Neil Dring, who died tragically at the age of just 38, 10 months after being diagnosed with cancer of the esophagus. He began complaining of severe headaches shortly after the airwave system was introduced. A health and safety advisor for Leicestershire Police said he was 99% certain that PC Dring's death had nothing to do with airwave, and added that another officer who had contracted cancer rarely used airwave. His death was really just an awful coincidence, and as sad as it was, and I mean this with the utmost respect, it was nothing to do with TETRA Airwave. This site didn't last too long and was archived in March 2005 before rebranding to Scottish Action on TETRA. This new incarnation was first archived in March 2005 and for the last time in August 2006 and was very similar to the website of No to Tetra Scotland. Interestingly, on their homepage was a link to an even newer site, scottishactiontetra.co.uk. Strangely, this was only archived 3 times between February and April 2005 and just linked back to the original Scottish Action on Tetra page. This one was archived for the last time in August 2006 before it disappeared. Now we'll head over to WART or Wednesbury Action for the removal of telephone masts. This one was first archived in 2005 and is a classic example of early 2000s internet. It really goes after the narrative of adverse health effects caused by cell towers, none of which existed, and the rapid spread of unauthorised towers around the area. This site spouted the same things all the others did, which we'll touch upon as we go, but my favourite part was the selection of campaign materials you could download for your next protest. Some of them are quite funny to be fair, but this one is a personal favourite of mine, along with this one, that really actually demonstrates how safe the technology is. The website was archived for the last time in August 2006. The Burnley and Pendle Mast Campaign Network, part of the wider PRISM network, PRISM standing for the Pendle Residents Against Intensive Sighting of Masts, was first archived in July 2007 but had been going since January 2006. It didn't come to much and was last updated in March 2006. Interestingly, it survived up until around the time of its last archive in June 2013. One website that served its purpose was Amphil Against Aerials. These guys engaged in a battle to have a cell site removed from the top of Amphil Fire Station Tower. The group formed in June 1999 and they won their case on June 8, 2000, meaning that the cell site had to be removed. The site was archived for the first time in April 2001 and lasted until May 2003, although there was no activity after June 8, 2000. Interestingly, this location today still has no cell site on the roof. Next we'll look at Ulster Community Against Tetra. This was first archived in 2004 and told the usual desperate Tetra health stories such as the Dursley cases and the Lancashire police story I featured in previous videos, all of which were completely unfounded. Interestingly, their news page featured a membership crisis. It seemed that the lack of any evidence of adverse health effects in regards to Tetra made people lose interest. It was archived for the last time in July 2005. Northern Ireland Families Against Telecommunications Transmitters, or NIFAT for short, appeared sometime around June 1998. It had some information on the sighting of cell towers near homes and schools, but not much else. It was first archived in April 2000, but last updated in around March 1999, so it was very short-lived. Interestingly, it survived online until October 2013, when it was last archived before disappearing. Save Headingley and Arford from Tetra were set up to save these 2 Hampshire villages from Tetra Airwave. It was first archived in November 2003, the same time it went live. It had a news page and a page where you could write to your local MP and planning office, but it was dealt a blow on the 25th of February 2004 when the council decided to approve planning permission for masts at nearby Beach Hill and White Hill. The page was never updated further and was last archived in June 2004. Perhaps it wasn't worth the fight anymore. Perhaps the site owners weren't as passionate after all. Seriously Concerned Residents Against Masts, or SCRAM, was first archived in December 2006, but was first launched in December 2005. The site featured news and resources. The group was set up in 2003 by Eileen O'Connor and Lynn Inslee, who attributed their illnesses to a mobile phone mast in the small village of Wishaw. They did a survey of the village and were apparently horrified to find a very high proportion of cancer and other biologically related illnesses. Their words, certainly not anybody else's. The website wasn't updated after June 2006, just 7 months after it launched, but survived until around the time of its last archive in June 2013. Eileen went on to found the still active Radiation Research Trust. At the same time, Sutton Coldfield Residents Against Masts, or SCRAM, was operational from at least February 2004 at the time of its first archive until around June 2005, the time of its last. There's not much to navigate within the poorly archived site, but it appears to have been rebranded or incorporated into the previous site we looked at, Seriously Concerned Residents Against Masts. There was also a rather strange Scram teen spin-off page. Tetra Masts Going Up in West Wales was a short-lived single page that appeared around February 2005 and was only archived once. It contained mostly copied information from other sites of the era. Another short-lived page, first archived in February 2004 and closed by September 2004, was Jeffson Farm Mast. This page was set up in protest of a mast on Jeffson's farm in Myton, Warwickshire. The mast was only temporary, but the archive is so poor it's hard to gain much of the story, and it closed before September 2004. Bardsey Mast first appeared around January 2002 and was concerned with the erection of cell towers in Bardsey and the Leeds area. They documented the various legal battles brought against T-Mobile and Orange, some of which were successful and others which weren't. They had a page where you could write to various key people involved in the rollout of the infrastructure or local MPs. The struggle became too much for them after a February 2005 ruling meant that GP Christine Nunn lost her High Court battle to have the tower she felt was affecting her family's health removed. The site ultimately became inactive and was last archived in April 2005. The Bishop Stortford Conservatives mobile phone mast campaign was first archived in April 2001 and seemed to serve as nothing more than a rambling mess aimed at gathering and maintaining local party support. It was last archived in August 2003 before it disappeared. Mast Action was what appears to be a Manchester area-based website that was set up to oppose planning requests in relation to cell towers and TETRA Airwave sites. It was first archived in April 2001 but may have appeared in May 2000. It contained all sorts of news, press releases, details of protests, a message board and forum, and a gallery which was unfortunately missed in the archive process. I'd love to see these pictures in full size. This was a site that always begged for donations to support the cause and claimed it cost £20,000 per year to operate just the website. It was last archived in February 2006 and at some point in its life became known as Mass Sanity. This is the early Mass Sanity page under the Mass Sanity URL. It looks identical to the Mast Action page, which became Mass Sanity. This was first archived in November 2002, so both sites were live at the same time before Mast Action closed. It evolved over time, but is still live today, despite there being no activity since 2013. Mast Action UK, not to be confused with Mast Action, was a Hertfordshire-based page that featured news on the fight against cell towers and the TETRA Airwave rollout. Their main issue was the proximity of cell sites to homes and schools, and not so much the rollout of cell towers in general. It featured a news page and a few old photos, but not much else in the early days. It was first archived in January 2002. The page grew somewhat as the years went by, and became a repository of news stories from all over. By the early 2010s it had a more modern look, and a few more pages had been added. One told of how to stop a mast from being erected. By the 2020s, it was promoting no-win, no-fee claims for health conditions caused by cell towers and television transmitters. Again, all nonsense, and it disappeared around the time of its last archive point in July 2022. One of my favourites is Mast Victims. This website was first archived in May 2005 and was designed to raise awareness of the harmful effects of cell towers. My favourite page is the Case Stories page, which features comments left by website visitors describing how cell towers and Wi-Fi ruin their lives. Many people did have physical health issues, but these were caused by the fear of a cell tower rather than the cell tower itself, and I've covered this a lot in previous videos, which are again linked below. The satire page was also funny, and the news pages were expansive, with hundreds of stories on the topic. There were over 300 first-hand testimonies referring to harmful radiation by the time of the last entry in 2020, and the last news update was in May 2022. It remained online until around the time of its last archive in November 2023. Protect Liss and East Hants from Tetra appeared around December 2003. It was more of a news sharing website which wasn't updated after February 2004, so was very short lived. It was last archived in April 2005. Another pointless short-lived site was the removal of Tetra masts in Cornwall Party. They wanted votes and wanted to beat the Tetra rollout, but after losing one appeal they gave up and disappeared by December 2005, just 7 or so months after launching. Protect Sussex from Tetra appeared in October 2003 and featured news and articles on Tetra's battles with the public up and down the UK. It focused on Sussex and Hampshire and had a page on electrical hypersensitivity too. The Sussex and East Hampshire pages lasted until around April 2004 when they were amalgamated into Tetra Watch. Tetra Watch was one of the biggest Tetra opposition websites out there. It first appeared in around June 2004 when it amalgamated with some other pages and lasted online right up until March 2024. I like the ridiculous quote on the left by Barry Trower. It had an extensive news page where they posted news from the UK and around the world on Tetra, Wi-Fi, cell towers and all things RF and health related. It had a page on how to protect yourself. Point number 3 is interesting. Food supplements are apparently a great way to protect yourself from the searing heat and radiation from your local Tetra tower. There was a page with localised stories, many of which were parroted on every other website, such as the Dursley case, where a new Tetra tower interfered with television signals and caused all manner of health problems, allegedly. There was also the highly publicised and completely unfounded Drummond case, in which a dolphin Tetra tower, which is unrelated to Airwave, allegedly caused numerous cancer cases. Again, all completely unfounded. The action page gave a list of things that Tetra Watch was doing and things you could do, but like most of these other sites, either a complete lack of any evidence or a loss of interest means that no news updates seem to have been made to the site after 2007. Vodafone Opposition in Culture, a place where they installed a cell tower inside a grain silo to ease the public's concern, appeared around September 2001. Their battle was with Vodafone, who had numerous planning applications approved, forcing residents to apparently look for a new home. It featured bits and pieces of the Stewart Report and some scaremongering about how a cell tower is apparently similar to a microwave oven. Needless to say, it was last archived in November 2002 and disappeared soon after. Chorleywood Against Mass Pollution was another interesting site that served mainly as a news repository for cell tower related stories. Like most of the sites, they cover stories of people's fears with nothing to back them up. Stories such as this in Trash Like the Sun did nothing but spread the fear amongst a suspicious public during this era. It talks of numerous cases of cancer in one street and blames a cell tower. Terrible and life-changing for those poor people who I have nothing but sympathy for, but again, science and common sense tells us that it wasn't down to a cell tower. The Chorleywood site also shared this story on Eileen O'Connor, who founded the Seriously Concerned Residents Against Masts page I covered earlier, and as horrible as her experience must have been, living with breast cancer at such an early age, the cell tower most certainly wasn't to blame. As I said in a previous video on this subject, we as humans often look for something to blame when dreadful things happen for no reason, and unfortunately this is clearly one of those cases. The site was last archived for the last time in September 2006, after 3 years of inactivity. The Dunton No Mask campaign started in July 2000, with the website launching in September 2000. It opposed a cell tower being installed at a water treatment works. More networks jumped on the site at Dunton, and the web page shifted to posting news from the wider area, but they gave up their battle in March 2001, and the site was gone by August of that year. FADA, or Families Against Dangerous Electronic Radiation, appeared in February 2000 and served as a news page for cell tower scaremongering. Their main concern was the installation of a cell tower at a church in Knaresborough, but there was no new news stories posted after February of 2002, and the last update was in January 2003, when they posted about an upcoming protest in London in March. This site lasted until the time of its last archive in June 2009. Another popular site that unfortunately hasn't been archived very well is Starwave. This was run by Dr. Graham Blackwell, an extremely smart man who, after propagating unfounded and disproven stories of Tetra killing police officers, came to his senses in 2007 when the website took a completely different turn, again presumably due to the complete lack of any evidence. The Tetra stuff was archived and disappeared around May 2012. Hilltop's Residents Association was a strange page that never really had any information or substance to it. It first appeared around December 2001 and lasted until February 2005, with the only update being the offer of the use of a handheld EMF meter for the sum of £5. Another page that appeared around April 2004 was Isle of Wight Tetra Action. They were part of a couple of campaigns, but the poor archive means we can't see the extent of their activities. It was last archived in September 2005. Harelands Against the Masts, also known as Goldsworth Residents Against the Masts, launched around April 2004 and featured protests and petitions against cell towers in the Woking area. They were amalgamated into Mast Action UK and posted no updates after June 2007. It disappeared around December 2007. The Llanid Lewis Against Tetra campaign was a Welsh group opposed to Tetra. They featured bits and pieces of news stories, but when their saviours were Barry Trower and Jay Griffiths, the one who wrote the nonsense Dursley story, it's no wonder they were gone by April 2005, 6 months after the site was launched.
The police there have just installed Tetra and caused uproar in the quiet village of Dursley.
There is radiation coming into the garden.
With a simple gadget, teacher Sue Everdell is checking for radiation in her garden. She's just over 100 metres from 3 Tetra masts that have been live for 4 months.
Higher up, it does show 3 circles lit of green. I'm concerned about it. It's worrying that my children are playing in this area of the garden quite a lot, which is where the radiation is registering. And the lower end of the garden, where it doesn't register, is an area they don't tend to go that much. So I'm going to have to think about how I arrange my garden for their playthings.
That's not all she's having to rearrange. Things have been moved inside as well as out. The masts went up, but she said they were told they wouldn't be live for a few months. Then Sue, her husband and daughter Jessie all started suffering disturbed sleep patterns.
She was quite disturbed the first few days that the mast went up, that she got abrupt waking several times a night, initially 8 or 10 times a night, and she also was a bit upset that she was seeing hallucinations as well. When she woke, she saw sort of sand patterns and wave patterns, and and my son wasn't affected. He sleeps in a back bedroom. Her bedroom is at the front of our house, as is our bedroom as well. Up we go.
The Mobile Phone Mast Action Group was created sometime before 2002 and first archived in February 2002. I felt somewhat sorry for these guys, as they had a cell tower slapped up right next to their property in 1994, which I'm sure some of you'll agree was visually imposing. Their main complaint was the noise from the construction and the fact that it loomed over their house. There was no update after 2005, so I don't know what became of this story. The website disappeared sometime after its last archive in July 2014. Planning Sanity was a planning support website linked to Mast Action that first appeared around late 2002 or early 2003. It may have been some help to some people. I've not taken a deep look into it, but they claimed high overheads, £20,000, and constantly bleated about donations. This site hasn't been updated since around July 2015 on the grounds of ill health. And finally, a page that started life back in 1996 for those suffering with electromagnetic hypersensitivity, a set of symptoms widely believed to be created in the mind and body by those who feel they're being harmed by electromagnetic energy. By the mid-2000s, they jumped on the bandwagon of harmful cell towers and were sharing the same old news stories to support the cause. Of course, there's no money in just attracting the gullible, so why not make money out of them? They offered a ridiculous rental scheme on equipment that tells you nothing and books full of nonsense. So that's a deep dive into the internet of days gone by and the dozens of websites that were set up in the fight against cell towers and TETRA Airwave. Did the lack of any evidence cause every single one of them to close down, or did they all succumb to the adverse health effects of cell towers? I'd be inclined to lead towards the prior.